Please welcome the panel to the stage.
All right. Are we live? Yeah, you can hear me? That's amazing. Hi, well, welcome to the panel. We're going to be talking about how the youth is leveraging technology to solve some of the problems that Africa is facing, and hopefully some of the problems that other countries around the world, or other nations and regions around the world are facing. So I have a very distinguished panel. I'm not going to go into the details. You've got everything you need in the app. You can find out who everyone is, and we're going to jump straight into the conversation. I kind of want to start this on an inspirational note, so I'm going to ask Maya, who effectively, as far as I can tell, kind of epitomizes the spirit that we're talking about here, the sort of young, entrepreneurial, creative, adventurous spirit that we are looking to kind of harness.
Oh, wow.
And I'd love to hear you talk about your perspective on the entrepreneurial landscape and also the sort of innovation landscape in Africa as you see it from your perspective.
Absolutely. And before I get started, I just want to understand in the audience, how many people have an idea of the demographics of Africa, of what's happening in the tech space, or raise your hand. Okay, so I don't need to do the whole spiel and background. But I mean, as you guys know, TLDR, 1.2 billion people on the continent, 75% of them are under the age of 35, 41% of them are under the age of 15. So it's a very young population. 650 million mobile users, or more mobile users than the US and UK combined. In the countries where we're targeting, Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Egypt, and Morocco, you have anywhere from 90 to actually 100% mobile penetration. So that means like everyone has phones. And you have anywhere from 80 to 100% internet penetration. So not only does everyone have a mobile phone, but they also have access and are actively using the internet. And this really interesting trend is also happening across the continent where with us, so as my background, I'm not going to go into all of it, but I run a venture capital fund. I was the youngest to launch a fund in Africa and the first sole female to launch a tech fund in Nigeria. And we have 52 companies in our portfolio. And obviously there are a lot of technical talent across our portfolio companies. And what we're finding, the emerging trend, is that about 40% of them, 40% are self-taught. So 40% of them, wherever they are based on the continent, got a laptop or used their phone to gain technical skills. And those numbers are only increasing. We also have, Fred will talk about the incredible work that he's doing, but us as a little blip in the big grand scheme of things, we also have a nonprofit that does technical training. So we've trained hundreds of thousands of African youths in technical skills, developers, designers, and product managers. And we have these incredible case stories of people who are living in the village in wherever random place that they are, get access to a laptop, do our 3-month technical training program, and then are able to earn dollars, euros, whatever it is, get access to international employment from being based on the continent. We have one story of a guy who was selling rat poison in the street in Lagos, got access to the technical training program, became a UX UI designer, and worked on the most recent Black Panther. So there are really incredible case studies of when you give just a little bit of internet access and a little bit of technical training, the incredible globally competitive talent that happen to emerge from the continent. And then within our own portfolio, so we closed our Fund 1 in 2019. In 2020, we had our first exit. So Paystack, our very first fund investment, sold to Stripe. Do you guys know the international payment company? Okay, so for over 200 million, and we invested very early stage. We've had 4 exits in the fintech space in our Fund 1 portfolio company of 26 companies. 26, 4 have sold since 2018. So also, we're talking about the incredible impact, how we're transforming lives, all those beautiful things. There's also a lot of money to be made in Africa. And our portfolio isn't just the only ones who have made money. There's incredible.
Are you selling those to international investors or to other Africans?
Yeah, so mainly what we're finding, so we come in very early, and what we're finding is two-sided. So the secondaries market is very ripe. So 75% of our Fund 1 portfolio entry valuations are 5 million post-money and below, and about 60% are 2.5 million post-money and below. So we come in very early. And because it's Africa, it's low competition, you can come in at these very low valuations, but by the time they get to Series A, Series B, given the greenfield market, the focus on financials from day one, because we don't have as much access to capital, we're seeing sales to global firms. So like Carry First, one of our portfolio companies, was backed by Andreessen Horowitz. Do you guys know Andreessen Horowitz? Google, Avenir, Greycroft, those sort of guys are getting very active in participating on the continent. And strategic acquisition. So we're seeing Google, Facebook, Uber, et cetera, coming in and investing in not only the technical talent, but also buying local assets as their market entry strategy. So we're seeing a lot of M&A activity. And then since COVID, we're also seeing a lot of intra-Africa M&A activity as well.
Yeah, which is really important. That's one of the things, I've been to many Africa conferences over my career, and one of the things that seems to be fairly consistent is that there's this appeal to international financiers to come in and bring their wealth into Africa to kind of build these projects. And it just doesn't seem to be working. Like mostly that money there's the intention, but it's not actually showing up. But it sounds like you're seeing it in a very real sense. Is that a developing trend, or is this an area that just has been a blind spot for me, possibly?
I mean, I'm definitely seeing it. Yes, 70% of the capital backing tech in Africa has been international, so foreign. Increasingly, we're seeing growth stage venture funds launching on the continent. It's just that it hasn't existed before. In 2016, there was only $129 million in all of Africa for venture capital. In 2017, there was about 560. In 2018, there was 1.2 billion. So we've been increasingly growing. But when I started a long time ago, there was really no money. There was maybe $50 million in the whole African continent. So as you're seeing this exponential growth in venture capital and technical talent, this explosion, you're also then seeing international investors starting to look, and simultaneously growth funds starting to establish domestically that can sort of support the continued growth of the ecosystem.
Right. Yeah, that's something I want to touch on later on, but let's keep the focus on sort of education and youth development at the moment. Yolanda, what are you seeing that works in terms of developing talent and creating opportunities for entrepreneurial young Africans?
Thank you for that. I think it's important to take note of the progress that we've seen in Africa in terms of youth development, skills development. But also we need to face the reality that we are not reaching everyone in Africa. Africa is a big continent, and therefore we are seeing the trends where we are seeing there's quite a huge digital divide in terms of skill transfer, skills development. But I can safely say with initiatives like Milken Motsepe Green Tech Prize, which I've just come out of the session from, there are initiatives that are supporting youth to help them to dream bigger, to help them to understand that there's more to their dreams than just dreaming in the small scale. So we've seen the likes of South African Institute of Electrical Engineers looking at innovation and technology, which is very critical for an African child to be able to see what is possible other than seeing it on TV. So I'm going to refer to what we've just did in the past year with Milken Motsepe Green Tech Prize, where we took young people for them to be able to see the real technology on the ground, not seeing it on TV. So I think such initiatives are really helping young people to see what's possible, and also affording international companies an opportunity to collaborate and be able to bring this innovation into South Africa. But we've got to face the fact that we still need to look into the divide, but also that speaks into, are we ready as as Africa for this technology transition and drive? And the answer is yes, we are, but there are things we need to do to make sure that we get our infrastructure ready, we get our young people dreaming beyond their current situations. So what you've just mentioned, the VCs that are there to, lend out or rather reach out into African organizations that are startups, we need a lot of those. We need think tanks. We need research and development. That's critical, because if we are going to be saying we need technology for Africa, it has to speak to the African challenges. So research comes really critical to understand what solution are we bringing, but for who is it fitting for the purpose. So those are the things we are looking at, and we are seeing an improvement, but there's still a lot of work to be done as organizations like ourselves and Milken and Motsepe.
Right. We were talking earlier on, you've worked for Eskom, which is the South African power utility. I don't know how many of you know what problems there are with Eskom, but rolling blackouts across, or brownouts, I guess, across much of South Africa kind of a case study of how not to run a company. I'm just really interested in what could the entrepreneurial, innovative youth of Africa, particularly South Africa, do to kind of solve a problem like that? Because that seems to be a very entrenched problem that really nobody in the current generation has been able to fix.
Well, there's an opportunity and a wide range of opportunity for young people to tap into ESCOM. And I think ESCOM is also open into that because they do have a young science expo, which allows young people, young girls from your secondary school to high school, even to tertiary education, to get into the space to bring in their innovative ideas in which they can be taken and be, checked to see if they are fitting for the current challenges that we have. So as much as ESCOM is facing, energy challenges, they are open into collaboration. They are open into allowing young people to get into the space, be empowered, be trained, be mentored, to be able to bring out the solutions that South Africa needs for energy. But not just energy, because we can't talk energy without talking innovation. We can't talk energy without speaking about technology. That goes hand in hand. So I think there's also a room for that, and ESCOM is a member to a number of associations that speaks to technology and innovation. One of those is South African Institute of Electrical Engineers, looking at innovation and technology, and entrepreneurship, in which I am the chairperson. So there is that eagerness to collaborate and bring young people into the space to bring about the change that we need to see. But that needs to be structured, that needs to be monitored and looked into, and to bring the right young minds who have the right ideas and are eager to bring their solutions into reality.
Well, is there a sense, you work in renewable energy a lot, and certainly over the past decade or so, we've seen a huge amount of innovation within Africa around distributed energy. I mean, some of the models that I see being rolled out in the West now were pioneered in, say, Kenya and other kind of East African nations. So is there a sense among the people involved in that within Africa, within the companies and organizations you're involved with, that they're actually leading the world, that there is an opportunity to be not just kind of playing catch up, but to actually be doing that leapfrog thing where the rest of the world looks in and says, wow, you guys have solved something we didn't even think was possible?
There's absolutely the thinking around leapfrogging with organizations that are in the renewable space. There's new technology. For instance, if you are in manufacturing of solar panels, there are new technologies. If you are in the battery storage, there are also technologies that are coming up, which these organizations are really opening up spaces for young people to bring about their ideas. Universities, some of the things we're looking to support, especially when we talk about the IP, because most people don't bring their solutions because they are so worried about their IP being stolen. So within the SAIEE, which is also big in South Africa, but also extending into other countries, is to ensure that there's support for that. People feel safe with their IP as they bring solutions into the space. So technology has been a very topical issue in Africa, not just in South Africa, because we need technology to drive all sectors, finance, education, health sector, energy. Mining is one of those sectors that are really depending into technology. So, but we need to have a structured way, a strategic approach of how do we get these ideas ready for the market, and how do we get these innovators, mentored, developed, and be ready for the market, because all they need is access to the market. All they need is access to the right information so that they can have the right decisions that they're making for their startups.
Right. That's really interesting about IP, though. I mean, do you feel that that's a constraining force on innovation, the concern about IP theft?
In a way, yes, and also maybe no. And I'm sure it differs country by country, but in some of the discussions that we've had with young people, the only thing they would bring up is our IP. We're going to give this to this organization or this investor, and then 2 years down the line, we lose the IP, we lose our hard-earned work. And like I said, one could differ from a different country, and it's something that we've been advocating. Rather give out the IP with the trust, other than keeping the solution that could save the continent or even the country. But again, it's a conversation that needs to happen to create safe space in these discussions that we're having with innovators and young people with great ideas.
I feel like Yolanda's got a solution for this.
Oh,
Or thought about it? Is this just the same you're facing the same questions?
I mean, specifically touching on the concept of IP, I think hyper-protection of IP can actually stifle innovation, and we've seen markets where the fear of replicating or sort of infringing on another's idea actually stops development. Like in Japan, that's like the idea of honor is, or at least what I've understood from entrepreneurs in the ecosystem, is so important, prioritized over disruption versus I'd say, looking at the Japan-China comparison and seeing one ecosystem that's about execution and one that is about idea and independence of idea. So I would looking at the continent, we see, on any given year, we see several thousand decks. And inevitably, I'm going to see 20 companies, 100 companies doing the same year. You know, in years where we see there will be a press release about some big company in a sector getting fundraising. And then I will see 50 decks doing the exact same thing. And it is about the execution. A lot of people have really great ideas, and they will never bring them to market. And if we are stifling development due to, or if we are limiting the ability of somebody's ability to move forward because someone owns an idea, we will not have anywhere near the amount of innovation that we've had on the continent.
So you're saying that the entrepreneurs need to be much more open to sharing what
and
they
also
do.
technology fundamentally is building in a stack. Nobody is like, you look at the financial services space, you need the core infrastructure technology, and then built on top of that, you need APIs to plug into consumer apps and consumer technology, which is on the top. So inevitably, everyone needs to be working together and building congruently. So I have thoughts about IP.
Yeah, and I do think it's important that we have these discussions because it seems like you're facing the similar, things that we are facing in our space, where entrepreneurs or innovators are really skeptical of sharing their IP because they're going to see it being done by someone else. So I think it's an issue or a matter that we need to discuss and find ways to create a safe space for IPs so that entrepreneurs don't hide away their solutions because they are skeptical of their ideas being, stolen.
Yeah, that's definitely not a subject that I thought we were going to be tackling in this, but it's actually a really interesting, anything that's a roadblock that we can start to address, that seems helpful. Fred, I'd love to bring you into the conversation. You've spent, really quite a long time focusing on education, helping to educate Africa's youth. What do you see that needs to change to kind of liberate this and empower this entrepreneurial spirit that we're talking about here?
Well, I think Africa's already got entrepreneurial spirit, right? So I think most Africans are born with it because it's not an option. It's sort of when you don't have so many jobs on the continent, you have to create your own job, right? So I think that I always say that Africa is the entrepreneur's paradise. Why? Because entrepreneurs are ultimately people who are driven by solving problems, and there are a lot of problems in Africa, right? So that naturally creates a lot of entrepreneurial people. What is really blocking people from achieving their full potential is, number one, education and skills development. Because we talk a lot about how Africa will have the largest workforce in the world by 2035, and it'll be bigger than China. But it's a bit of a misnomer because we'll have the largest population, but population is not equals to talent. It needs to be converted. And that happens through skills development and education, right? So number one, we need a massive skilling revolution, right? We need to just train hundreds of millions of people in Africa, right? And we have to do it in innovative ways because the traditional ways cannot do it.
Well, this is kind of the question I want to ask you is, obviously we've been talking about this for a long time. Like again, my whole time covering Africa as a journalist, that's been an issue. We've been talking about the demographic dividend versus demographic time bomb. If you can't educate enough people, then you're not really creating that workforce. You're just creating a lot of people that need to be fed. So what actually needs to change to have that happen, though? Because, as I say, we've been talking about this for a long time.
I think it needs to be done at scale. You see, one of the things that I hear often is people say, don't educate people because you don't have jobs for them. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it. So people, when they look at training programs, they see what percentage of people got a job within 6 months or 1 year. I think that's what I call a vanity metric, because it actually makes you feel good, but it doesn't really have the impact. So when you look at India, they trained 30 million people in technology skills in over 20 years. maybe only 30% of them have a job today. But that's 10 million people who have jobs in the tech sector. So what we need is just train millions of people without wondering whether they'll get a job or not. Because if only 30% of 100 million people get a job, that's 30 million jobs. Rather than 95% of 1,000 people, which is what we are doing today. So we need a massive skilling, and that's going to come from from using technology. I'll give you an example. We acquired a school in Silicon Valley that was training engineers for Tesla and Apple and Amazon and NASA even. And the graduates were earning more than Stanford graduates, more than Yale graduates, more than Caltech graduates. We brought that school to Africa. They had 1,000 students in Silicon Valley. Within 2 years, we had grown to 200,000 people. And today, we're probably the largest single trainer of software engineers in the world, right? The entire USA graduates 50,000 people with computer science degrees out of 4,000 colleges and universities. We as one institution are training 250,000, right? And we're just getting started. So we need to scale, and we're going to train millions of people. And, if even 50% of them get a job, that's then a massive pool of talent that is skilled, educated. They're founding companies. Last year, we incubated 400 startups, tech startups from this talent. And this year, we're looking to do a couple of thousand.
And these are tech startups in
Africa, yeah. Tech startups in Africa, right? So, because once they've got the skills, now they start creating things, right? They start building their ventures, right? And then the final thing that you need once you've got the skilling is then you need capital, right, to come in. And that, again, is increasing, but it's nowhere near where it should be. But it won't come without the talent. And investors won't come without the talent. Companies won't come without the talent. We have to create so much talent that you can't ignore it, right? And that comes from skilling. So we need to stop waiting for the jobs first. We just need to educate first. Did the US wait until they could guarantee jobs for everyone before they train people? Because today, when you look at tertiary education rates, the US and Europe, 70% of people have post-secondary education. In China, that's about 45%. In India, it's about 38%. In Africa, it's 8%. And people say, oh, don't skill people until you can get them jobs. No, we need to skill. Give them higher education. The US didn't wait to know that in 20 years' time there'd be jobs in AI and in Uber, all these technologies that have developed. They just educated people. So that's what we need to do.
Yeah. Well, and once people are educated, they can kind of create their own jobs as well.
Exactly.
It's that whole startup scene.
And get access to international employment. Like one of our analysts at Ingressive Capital he doesn't even have a passport. He's never left Nigeria. And yet has more contacts at Andreessen Horowitz and Sequoia and all this, literally just on Twitter. He produces very engaging content and then establishes these contacts. And we've also seen with Ingressive for Good, them getting jobs from DMing random people they've never met before on LinkedIn or on Twitter. So it's not even limited to the African continent. We're seeing so many people getting access to international employment being based in Africa through training programs like that.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about technology jobs is that you can do the work remotely. So you can get global jobs without the brain drain because they stay in the continent. And the other thing is also we shouldn't be worried about exporting our talent. Talent needs to be Africa's greatest export this century.
Wow, I feel like you've changed your thoughts.
I did. Now, let me tell you why. When I started my journey in training, I was at small scale. So we're training people at 250 students at a time at African Leadership Academy. That was 20 years ago. Then we created universities and we took it to 2,500. And then we're training this tech talent, we're at 250,000. Then I was like, oh, brain drain is only a problem when you're educating at low scale. Because in Ghana, they graduate 600 doctors a year. 300 leave on graduation day to go to the UK and US. If you're graduating 50,000, I don't care if 1,000 leave or 5,000 leave. The rest stay. So what we need is to massively scale up. And then if 20% leave, the 80% are left there and they'll still solve the problems, right?
Well, and many of those that leave come back
They come back, they send remittances home, and so forth. So talent needs to be, it's the one thing we can beat China in. It's the one thing we can beat the entire world in.
Well, it's almost like anything protectionist is not good, right?
Yeah.
We're just kind of keeping the borders closed. That doesn't lead to a good result. So I'm interested also that you've now started SAND technologies. Because you've been in education for a long time, now you've started something that's actually a tech firm. Like, what's the rationale for that in the context of what we're talking about here? Well,
Well, so my journey over the last 20 years was small scale to large scale, right? 250 students, 2,500 students, 250,000 students. So once you started building this massive pool of talent, I said, okay, well, how do you create opportunities for this talent? So one is we said, well, let's partner with companies who want to hire this talent. Two is we've created ALX Ventures where we're incubating all these startups. Three, we said, actually, we need to build our own firm that's going to hire these people. And so that's why we created Sand Technologies, right? To build, so Sand Technologies is building sophisticated AI solutions for governments and companies around the world. 85% of our revenues come from outside of Africa. So we serve clients in the US, in Europe, in Indonesia, even in India. And we're exporting this talent, but they sit in Africa. And they build, we manage the water infrastructure in the city of London, right? Our AI engineers are predicting when a pipe is going to burst in the city. They're preventing leakage from going to the oceans. We worked with AT&T in the US to figure out where should they lay fiber in continental USA with African talent. So we're doing very sophisticated things using this talent pool. And the reason we said we had to do it ourselves is because when the world looks at Africa, you keep hearing, you read annual reports of technology companies say, oh, we're struggling for tech talent. There's high turnover. India is no longer working for us because there's lots of attrition. So we're going to Vietnam. Or we are going to Latin America. And the elephant in the room is Africa. And no one is coming to Africa. So we realized we actually have to do it ourselves. India, when they started building tech talent, it was homegrown Indian companies. Tata Consulting Services, Infosys, HCL, that built the tech sector. Only after 30 years of doing that did Deloitte and Accenture and everything set up operations in India, in GE. So if we don't do it, so we have to build a big giant technology company in the world using African talent, and then maybe in 10 years people wake up and say, wow, where did Sand Technologies come from? Well, then they'll start coming. So we have to build it ourselves, otherwise we'll keep waiting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, thank you for that. Walter, I wanted to bring you into the conversation. Thinking about innovation, you were talking earlier that you've created a social exchange as a way to kind of build talent and create resources, bring availability of resources to those that need it.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a very interesting topic. So I'm quite optimistic with this panel. I'm very, I'm listening quite carefully to my colleagues are saying. From our point of view, the Angolan Stock Exchange, it's a stock exchange is a platform for trading that we provided to the country. As Fred was mentioning, we had to do it. We faced a lot of backlash, but we had to do it, and now we have a $8 billion trading volume. Now it's growing up a lot in the country. But of course, we understand that in Angola we also have a very interesting talent pool in the country, and one of the things that I've done when I came to the US is, I just threw all my notes and went to ChatGPT and asked what are the top 5 pressing issues in Africa. And ChatGPT ranked them, and I did my own ranking, and I thought that food security is probably one of the biggest pressing issues that we face in the continent, and we cannot solve food security without the talent and without technology. So these two topics are something that we need to implement in our continent. So what we have done here as the stock exchange, instead of waiting for something to come, we have developed some sort of a social exchange. It's a sort of a crowdfunding platform where we can invest in social projects. But the whole idea is not to have a social return, is to invest in entrepreneurship. And our focus now is for women empowerment. And basically we are bringing technologies from other countries, and we are developing technologies in the country to increase productivity. But all idea is to increase income so that these people can have access to the financial markets. Now the results are we have a track record of 4-5 months, and we have doubled the productivity in that space.
In 4 or 5 months?
4 or 5 months. Wow. We brought technology from Brazil, and this technology was actually invented in the US. So they tropicalized the technology in Brazil, agri-tech. And then we put this technology in that region using our platforms. We brought investors using our platforms. Now we are using that as a sort of as a sort of ecosystem to foster new technologies. So we have monetary technology, agri-technologies, financial microcredit technologies that fintechs are trying to develop to cater to those people. And to tell you, we just invested $80,000. It's just as cheap as it's a very small.
Are you surprised at the success of this already?
I am absolutely surprised. Yeah, I'm very surprised. I'm surprised that if you put together education, access to funding, yes, and access to markets, you can solve one of the most pressing.
Well, this is what we've got in this panel, right?
Exactly. And what I find interesting from their point of view is that, the two things that my colleagues mentioned, that Maya mentioned and Fred mentioned, it's financing and education. Yeah. So if you put the two things together, yeah, and you don't need the major policies, you need major infrastructure, and you can solve these pressing issues with small amount of money. Yeah? And everybody that invests in this platform, as all the reports, everything is quite transparent, and we are having very, very strong successes. So it's about 10,000 families. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's I can go through and explain to you, the things that we have done there, but the way we are doing this, we are seeing increasing productivity, but also people have more free time. But what they do with their free time, they go to our training sessions. Yeah, so we are creating a virtual cycle there. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it's all about putting together technology, financing, and access to markets.
But you mentioned you're focusing on women entrepreneurs. What's
Yes.
the rationale for that?
I mean, if you go, Angola is twice the size of Texas, yeah, and we have 30 odd million people, so almost 40 million people. So it's a very huge country for the number of people that we have. In the rural area, all the heavy lifting is done by females, yeah, by the females, and if they spend 10 hours working, they will not spend time educating their children. They will not spend that time educating themselves. So if you can put together an infrastructure where you increase productivity to them, so they will have more time to educate their children, they will have more time to educate themselves. Yeah. So this is why our focus is on women entrepreneurship and basically women empowerment.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. So, Ramadan, you are involved in one of the key elements of what we've just been talking about here, which is trying to get resources, financial resources, to people that need it, to kind of encourage their development. So, tell us a little bit about that. I'm super excited about some aspects of it, particularly the Web3 part.
Right. So
you might need to really concentrate here, unless you're kind of crypto friendly or crypto kind of native. There's going to be a little element of that in there. But tell us what you're up to.
Yes. So I try to stay away from the C word as much as possible. So what I'll talk about more is just simply information, right? Some of the things that people are talking about in the panel has to do with discrete transactions. On some level, there's this sort of issue with rising population doesn't equal a rise in GDP without workforce enablement, right? Which we've also covered here today. But there's also another piece I think that's important, which is short-termism and asymmetry of information and rational versus irrational risk. So that's sort of like the theme that I'll sort of stay with. So we believe and we see that value is oftentimes eroded. So when you make money and you have savings for a year and build enough to buy a house, you put all your savings in US dollar account, and then 2 weeks before you found the perfect house, you know it's going to take between 3 days and 6 days to migrate your capital to local currency, so you do. And then you find that inflation hit this week, and you no longer have enough money to buy your home between the day you selected it, the day you signed it, and the day you did your transaction. So that's what we call being on some level economically chained to the mores of global trade, to the US dollar and monetary controls or policy. And so what we have seen is an issue is that it's time to make it possible to have and leverage economic freedom, right? And for us, that means tokenizing gold and other natural resources to make it possible to transition from local currency to a store of value, as gold is a store of value, and other in-the-ground resources a store of value, to allow people to begin to think more about how can I plan for the future, How can I start looking at education? How can I get involved in the Learn to Earn program? And that now becomes possible because we are able to take gold and sell it for as little as 10 cents in what we coined the milligram market, right? So in a nutshell, that is what we believe, that there is not only gold, but other traditionally liquid assets that are in abundance across the African continent. And being able to unlock those means being able to leverage digital ledger technology to begin to track what is effectively untrackable now, and being able to do that then allows us to work with global financial markets to ensure these tokenized products and make it possible for the international market to bring more capital into the ecosystem, right?
So you're essentially talking about creating new financial products or new financial structures that enable people to store value that otherwise they wouldn't be able to do, and to do it in a way that's then not subject to the vagaries of international exchange rates.
Yes, yes. I mean, so it just means that, generally speaking, if you have a Naira or Kenyan shilling and you get paid today and 3 hours later you buy the US dollar, you've effectively contributed to the devaluation of your currency against the dollar, which is right now part of and one of the largest currencies in which people do business. So every single day you devalue your currency, you make goods more expensive, you make it more difficult to generate value, and you put or create additional FX risk when you want international money to come in that you have to pay back.
So how does the development of these technologies and the availability of it affect the conversation we're having now, the sort of liberating and empowering talent in Africa?
Well, if you earn and live in a currency, or a Naira, we'll call it, or Kenyan shilling, or the birr, which is my favorite personally. But if you live in an environment where you're doing that, you need to be able to think about education and not worry about the fact that if you don't spend your money, it's not going to be valuable tomorrow. And so what we're doing is basically making it possible for someone to go, okay, I might have some doctor bills down the road. I can save for that now, which means I can start thinking about getting access to programs that pay more, or have time to just simply breathe because I can move my US dollars into gold and hold it there. That's, it's super simple, but that's it. Ultimately, when you have that freedom and you have options and you have reduced downward pressure, you can now start thinking about, at a business level, how do you manage your budget? How are you going to service doing and building out a telecommunications or data center in Abuja for a party that's located in London, where you have to import resources globally, and you were paid 6 months ago, and now you have to basically deal with the fact that 6 months later you still have to order parts that are global, and you no longer have the money to pay for it anymore because you stored your capital in a local currency. It's now devalued. So it costs you more money to do international business. It costs you more money to provide services, even though you've got great technology and great mental capabilities. You still can't provide a service internationally unless you can set up an international bank account. Great. So there's like 15 to 20% of those in a very small population that have the ability to do that. But what about everybody else? And we think it's important to change the narrative. We think it's important to make it possible for us to bring about the Star Trek generation by making knowledge known by everybody and allowing people to go, I don't want to service the global market. I want to service my hometown. And you can't do that if you can't store value. You can't do that if you're stuck dealing with like mistrust of a new farm subsidy that you're never going to see. So digital tokenization and digitization of gold makes it possible for everybody that's outside of the system begin to see flows.
Unless that farm subsidy is tokenized and then sent via crypto rails straight to your account. So
unless that subsidy is tokenized and sent via digital ledger technology rails. But I want to be very clear that like crypto is typically called crypto because there is a formula associated with value. What we are using is digitized gold, which has to one-to-one backing, which isn't a formula. So if you buy gold and you want to swap your gold out for money, you can. If you want us to send you your gold, if you've got over $600 worth of it, we'll just send it to you. So it's not about crypto. It's really about digital ledger technology and leveraging existing or digital ledger technology infrastructure to make it possible to free yourself from economic slavery, for lack of a better word, to another way of having choices, right?
So we are going to have a quick Q&A at the end of this. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the system. I see them on this iPad. But we already have a question from...
Yeah, I have a question. So is the idea, because there's volatility, there's volatility in commodities.
Yeah.
So your belief is that the volatility will be less that of African currencies?
Well, I mean, that is not my belief. But I think that in many cases, commodities represent value, and the relative value of that commodity with the currency is really a function of how current information is with GDP and production of a country and a national requirement for that resource, right? And so in many cases, if it's just a demand function. So if it's more expensive, it just means that that country actually has more demand for that resource.
But then it can become
Right,
volatile.
right. So how do you deal with this sort of volatility? I don't want, nor do we want, people to use gold as a means of transaction, right? That's what money's for. That's what fiat's for. But gold is more for a store of value. So if you're looking at holding gold for 2 days and swapping out, I don't have a solution for that. But I do believe that commodities were what we originally used to transact. And so I do believe that from a safety perspective, pick a commodity that's safe. Pick a commodity that you think adds value, that underpins what if you're African is what your main export is or what your main value is, because there's a whole lot of value in the ground that can be used and collateralized to provide and be a balance sheet to finance local development. And that's what I'm referring to. So maybe it's not for you or for your portfolio, but it is for the Treasury Department of the portfolio companies that you work with to begin looking at managing Q3 or 2H or Q4 budget that may not be able to get exposure to the traditional capital markets by storing that value in gold that either might be with the central bank. If you call us, depending where you are, we might already have a relationship with that central bank, and we might be able to get you or offer you their gold. Give us a couple months, and we can offer that as well.
Sounds like you guys need to have a side conversation.
Yeah, we'll discuss.
Well, I mean-
We'll discuss.
It's getting a little bit technical.
I want you guys to understand that everybody that used to say gold, 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 buy gold now, and every generation has that person, that there's economic freedom in it, right? And there's economic freedom in a way, leveraging decentralization so that in 1971 or the next 1971 rolls around, that a country doesn't arbitrarily decide to remove gold from their currency and you're stuck with paper again. So digital tokenization allows for gold to be where it is all over the world, for it to be insured, monitored, and allow you to effectively go back in.
I think what's exciting about that, and that is somewhat relevant to this panel as well, is just that these new technologies, these new ways of funneling funneling assets from one place to another, are really kind of reinventing money. And I think a lot of what holds back the developing world, I see this in not just in Africa, in countries all around the world. A lot of the problem is that they are kind of chained to this international financial structure that's essentially the dollar. And we have other currencies trying to kind of get a foothold there. But once you stop thinking about money in the concept, in its current incarnation, it changes how you view value. And you can start to look at a country like Gabon or Costa Rica or Indonesia as incredibly wealthy, because you're talking about putting value on natural resources, natural wealth. That's and right. You're not just thinking about cash and banks and big buildings and fast cars.
And
Go ahead.
technology, equity, and ownership are some of the fastest and most decentralized ways to build wealth, period. To give someone technical skills and access to a little bit of financing can lead to them transforming multiple generations.
Because of the scalability, or?
The founders of Paystack and their whole executive team and even their mid-level employees also had an ESOP. So they had equity in the actual entity. So when Stripe bought the asset for $200 million plus, in a matter of a few years, all of these people built transformative wealth that they could then, and did, start building new businesses and investing back into the technology sector. So also equity and ownership as a means to democratize access to wealth across Africa is really what we are all focused on.
So I think there's a bigger point in that, which is around when talent are given skills, it allows you to break the power of the elite. So if that's why I was saying earlier, talent exports should be our greatest focus, because all other forms of creating wealth, if you look at other export industries like oil and gas, mining, manufacturing, import-export, banking, you need a license to do it. Who gets the license? Those who are politically connected. When those few people make money, they keep it to themselves. And so you have a few billionaires who make money, and then they buy some houses, a yacht, and then they'll employ 100 people in their house. But that's it. But if 100,000 people have tech skills, or 1 million people, and they can work remotely, and they can earn US dollars, and it's tokenized and kept in
Not in US dollars.
in gold, the equivalent, gold, whatever, right?
Gold.
You now have wealth that's distributed amongst 100,000 people instead of 100 billionaires. And that wealth, every person who earns that money gets to spend it in the shops. They use an Uber, they have a cleaner, and that one person creates 10 other jobs. And this is what they found, for example, in India. India generates $240 billion a year in Forex from its 7 million tech workers. But each of those people employ 5 to 10 people others. That then creates a lot more jobs, right? So this is the way we break the power of the elite in Africa, by giving hundreds of thousands of people skills, and then no one can stop them from getting wealth.
And to add into that, we start at the grassroots, because we can't start later after tertiary. I think there has to be a systemic change in our education system in Africa, where curriculum changes and allow robotics. And I know some schools do that, but not many schools. And most of students are attending public schools, which the infrastructure isn't there to allow for that, or to facilitate for that. So to get to where you are, referring to, we need to start at the grassroots. We need to ensure that young kids are started while they are young, to be introduced into the topics that we are talking about, so that their minds are opened up, and then they know how to select careers of choice as they grow up. So we can't just start at tertiary or just post-tertiary. It's good, but we have to, if we want to accelerate this transition, we need to start back at the grassroots and build up. I think that's what we need to do. We'll get to exactly what you're saying.
I think, the more real-world examples of the sort of things we're talking about on this panel, the more people see the actual benefit of the education, the benefit of having access to the internet, having access to expertise, mentorship, all the rest of it, the more we're going to see that developing, and we're going to see people planning educational courses saying, well, look, we need to bring this technology in because we've seen how it works, and we've seen the transformative effect, that Walter was talking about today.
I just realized in our fund 2, 5 of our investors are founders from our fund 1, who I don't think any of them made over $500 a month in their life before starting their company. 5. And that's only since 2019. And we closed our fund last year. So that was 4 years. 5 people built enough wealth to put a meaningful investment in our second fund.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
So if I can just...
Absolutely.
So the idea is, when you have people like that are finally making capital and making money, you don't want them to take their dollars out of the country. You certainly don't want them to buy US dollars. You want them to actually find ways to... I'm an American, so I'm actually the only American on the team, and I served in the military, so I'm all about America. And if you cut me, I'll bleed red, white, and blue. That said, I'm also an economic ambassador, right? I'm of the slave descendant, so I was one of the first economic ambassadors from Africa, which is my birthright. And in many ways, I think about what that means. And sure, it was misunderstood, and my parents were put into slavery instead of being economic ambassadors. But I'm here to be that for a continent that I came from. And I think it's important for people to recognize that in that fact, if you make money, find a way to effectively look at the in-the-ground resources as a means of backing value. And I'm not just talking about gold. I'm also talking about tokenizing real world assets, other assets that have value. So tokenizing or using tokenization to finance affordable housing, so that people that are making money can move from a slum to a house that has plumbing and working water and electricity. So that's absolutely what I consider to be fundamental to move from short-term thinking to be able to have the friends that know these people, right? But it takes a transformation of mentality. It takes an ability to migrate from an emotional fear state to emotional abundance state. And that comes with having basic needs met. So like we need to be talking about poverty.
Well, one of our questions that we have just a couple of minutes for, it actually relates directly to that basic needs. How can the development in tech and wealth generation contribute to addressing large-scale health and development issues in Africa? I think particularly health issues. So if anyone has a thought about that.
I mean, I can talk about that. We are doing this right now in Rwanda. The big shortage in Africa is there aren't enough doctors, right? So in Italy, for example, there's 300 patients per doctor. In Africa, it averages 8,000 patients per doctor. In South Sudan, it's 66,000 patients per doctor. So if we're going to provide healthcare in Africa, we can't do it relying on doctors. And those few doctors that we have are leaving every day to go to the UK, right? So what we built is a system in Rwanda where we are connecting rural clinics with high-speed bandwidth using SpaceX satellite. And then with that now, a nurse or even a community healthcare worker can be equipped with AI-enabled devices to more sophisticated diagnosis of a patient. And Google's Gemini, for example, it passed the US medical licensing exam with a score of 96%, which is an expert level. So now a nurse, a community healthcare worker can have access to that. And then we've linked that, because they have high-speed bandwidth, those sophisticated cases that they can't handle can now be, you can do telemedicine with the doctor sitting somewhere else. We've linked it to Zipline, so they can deliver medicine by drone to the clinic. And then all of that data comes into a health intelligence center for the Minister of Health to be able to see real time what's going on in the system. Yesterday, 500 babies were born. There's early signs of a pandemic over there. You can see, where do you need to do a campaign against diabetes or high blood pressure. So you no longer fly in the dark as a Minister of Health. You know where to allocate your resources, and it shifts the health system from being reactive and expensive to much more predictive and preventative. You can identify someone who's at risk of cancer at an early age and prevent it. So this system is live. We are rolling it out in Rwanda. We're taking it to South Sudan soon, and we're going to take it across Africa. But it's this kind of thing where technology allows us to redefine how development is done. We can do it much faster, much cheaper, and in a much more innovative way. And that's why we need these technology skills in Africa.
Yeah, and you don't have the entrenched resistance to it as well. We could do a whole panel about Zipline and the impact it's had with blood deliveries and so on in Rwanda. But I just want to kind of wrap this panel up and say I came into it with an open mind, not quite sure where we were going to go with the conversation. And the overwhelming feeling I have is that Africa is no longer waiting. Like what you're talking about is they're not sitting there, people in Africa are no longer sitting there waiting for the foreign investment to come in, the foreign ideas, foreign direction. It's all about saying, we're going to do this now, we're going to make it happen, and we're going to realize our own potential. So I really appreciate your insights, really appreciate your attention. Thank you for joining us.